You go ahead and bring us in.
Hello, hello, hello. How you guys doing today? My name is Shanice Montgomery, and I am here with two major people in the community. I have DA Flynn Brody from the Cobb County, and then I also have Fallon McCure, and she is a defense attorney, amongst a lot of other things. And then I have our founder and president, Sean Smith.
Hey, hey, hey. So we today we're going to be talking to Fallon and we're going to be talking to DA Brody about some of the issues going on in Cobb County, but not only just in Cobb County in particular, Trinice. We want to talk about things that are going on all across the board, right? Because what's being reflected over in Cobb County is being reflected across the country in certain aspects. But we wanted to start off by giving you opportunity, DA Brody. I know you did this last week to kind of talk about some of the differences, some of the changes you've made in the Cobb County DA's office and some of the things you're looking to still do.
The first thing we did was we made our accountability courts pre-adjudication instead of post-adjudication. That allows somebody who completes a accountability court to have their charges dismissed. And the reason we did that, because going through the accountability court is not easy.
Yeah.
Usually it's a 2 or 3 year program, requires drug testing, requires counseling, requires community service. There's a lot of things that they have to do, and to successfully complete it is pretty hard. It's something that you have to show that you want to improve yourself. So I made the decision that we're going to do those pre-adjudication instead of post-adjudication. We started off with our Veterans Court. We had a ceremony 2 Fridays ago where those who were eligible, we brought them back after graduation and dismissed their charges. And I thought their service to our country granted that for them. The next thing we're trying to do is we're trying to do an early intervention court. And the early intervention court is designed for nonviolent offenses. So people come to, when they get arrested for nonviolent offenses, we bring them into court. We give them a court date 30 days after that. One, it keeps them from being in jail because they'll get out of jail without a bond. Secondly, we bring them back with an opportunity to enter a diversion program and accountability court. So that way, once again, they can get out of there without any charges being put on their record. So those are two of the things that we focused on. We're trying to make sure that people have an opportunity to get back to the community as productive citizens by not being hampered by a criminal charge.
Absolutely. And I think that's really important. That's something that we needed, something that needs to be changed, because people shouldn't lose their lifeline while they're waiting to figure out what's going to happen on the other end. So we also have Fallon. I call her the famous Fallon. I don't know why, because I can't have a meeting without her name being mentioned. And Fallon, as you know, is a defense attorney, but she recently has been working in more so social injustice issues. You want to talk about some of the things that you're doing, Fallon, and some of the things that the many organizations that you're a part of that you're currently working with.
Okay. I think, so yes, I am on the board of several organizations, but I think the most important one, at least for this conversation, is I'm on the board of Reform Georgia. And what we are doing is working with data to come up with policy solutions to help essentially bring about criminal justice reform, right? And so a lot of times we have these ideas and we're trying to get them pushed, but we provide data, we dig through it, we go to meetings at the Capitol, et cetera, and we make presentations to be like, look, more police doesn't make the community safer, right? Or, hey, this policy, while it seems good in theory, this is going to be the unintended consequences, right? So like, one of the ones that comes to mind is, like all the 3 strikes and the tough on crime stuff, right? And so they're like, hey, we thought this stuff was going to help the communities, but ultimately it got us into the mass incarceration problem. And so Reform Georgia is just, providing the data. We're working with your Southern Center for Human Rights and your other places to like back up their research and stuff and to get real solid reforms in place.
Yeah, and that's I was on you invited me to a Zoom meeting the other day where they was talking about Atlanta and Atlanta politics. But one of the things that was interesting, the other day we had a meeting with DA Patsy's office, and her name was Brenda. And Brenda was talking about, it's not just changing the way we do things in the DA's office. It's a policy aspect that goes behind it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, like you stated to me earlier today, the DA office's job is to enforce the law. And if the law is not written where it's formally and one of the things I was watching something the other day where somebody kind of went off on YouTube and they were saying like, it's crazy how my brothers and sisters, they get locked up. They don't go home, right? They don't go home. They're still sitting in jail. And we know in Cobb County, for example, there are some violent offenders or people who are accused of violent things who are still sitting in jail right now because they haven't had a chance to have a bond hearing yet because they've COVID and everything. But the guy was going off because they were watching people who attacked the Capitol go into federal court, you know, and walk right out of federal court. And that image is something that, once again, when people talk about our community and why we're so upset, they don't understand that image. You know what I mean? And I think that that's a policy perspective, or something that needs to be changed policy-wise.
A lot of it is due on implicit bias. Many people perceive them not to be a threat, that this one incident was all that their threat was about.
Right.
And so once they've released from that, they don't feel like they're going to do anything else wrong. And for us, we've had that look that if you're Black, you're a threat to the community, and so we got to keep you behind bars. And that's one of the reasons why we have to do bond reform. Bond reform is critical because, one, the economic consequences behind it are enormous. When you're sitting in jail for 50, 60, 70 months, you've lost your job, you've probably lost your home, and you probably even lost your family. And we cannot continue to do that. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing that early intervention court, because instead of a 3 or 4 year time between when you get arrested and when your sentence is decided, now we're cutting that down to 90, 120 days. And that's not 90 and 120 days while you're in jail, but just for the conclusion of the case itself.
Yeah, but that's from the nonviolent perspective. Are we talking about? So we're not. I mean, right now we would have to say probably in Cobb County, violent offenders are not per se. People who are accused of violent crimes are not being treated the same way per se. Right?
No, we're not treating violent criminals the same way. There has to be an assessment done on them to see if they actually are a threat to the community. Because if they're a threat to the community, my job is to make sure that they stay behind bars, because my ultimate goal is community safety.
Right. Absolutely. And that's important. Like I was telling, I think me and you were having this conversation the other day. You know, it's so different because, you know, BlackPush, we not only speak for violent offenses, nonviolent offenses, we're there for everybody, right? And the whole aspect of it is that, for me, I want to see the system that if a African American comes in there for a charge of writing a bad check, and a white person comes in for a charge of writing a bad check, and they have the same background, where the sentences match both of them, like where one's not being sent away to prison for 2 years and coming back out on probation for another 2 years, and one goes home on probation the same day back to his family, right? And I think that was one of the conversations that we had in over in Gwinnett, is that justice has to be fair and it has to be even. It's not about not saying that people who do things wrong don't need justice. And I think from an attorney perspective, you probably agree. It's about the fact, or maybe not, but it's about the fact that it has to be fair and even across the board. Well, and I think that that's important.
I also think that's where representation comes in, right? And I think that's why it's important that, you know, we have, you know, some of our first Black judges on the Superior Court here in Cobb, you know, with Kelly Hill and Angela Brown, which have both been amazing judges and done a lot of work throughout the community for years and years and years, right? And so when you have people in these positions of power that don't understand or choose not to understand who you are or where you come from, it's easy then to have these disparities, right? And so I think, along with having you know, more paths and access to better representation, but then there's also, like, you know, policy concerns too. So when we talk about, you know, these violent offenses and, you know, having probable cause hearings and things and binding them over to, you know, to the DA's office, you know, that standard and that threshold is very low, right? It's not, I mean, and typically, you know, you have just the officer presenting, you know, one side of the story that came from the victim at this point. And, you know, and so again, that's where, you know, policy and advocacy on those levels, perhaps we need to look at, you know, changing those. And another one that comes to mind is like repealing citizens arrest, right? As we saw with like Ahmaud Arbery and stuff. And so I think I say that all to say that I think the fight is on many fronts. To make it more equitable for whether you're Black or white or brown, and then also the discrepancies between violent and nonviolent offenses as well.
And just to throw something in there, we don't want the justice system to equate to money.
Right.
And for a long time, that's what it's been. If you've had the money to seek representation and throw those dollars up there, you've gotten more justice than a normal person. And so that's our biggest fight, is to make it equitable and take out the money equation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, because like you stated earlier today, I mean, if a person spends 3 or 6 months in jail, I mean, I've had employees who had to go to jail before. I've managed companies where we had over 140 employees, and I remember one time in particular, one employee was locked up for like a violation of probation, and he ended up getting out and getting reinstated, but it took 6 months. You get what I'm saying? But luckily enough, I was the kind of person I was like, come on back. Your job is still here, but there's not a lot of people out there who can wait.
No,
Yeah.
it's not. It's definitely not.
Yeah, and not even 3 to 6 months, like 1 month,
Yeah.
especially now, people are living paycheck to paycheck. And I mean, even people that don't seem like they are, right? And especially like with COVID and how it's hit a lot of industries, which is why, I think we should have continued moratoriums on evictions and foreclosures and all of these things as well.
And especially for our low-paying jobs, those are the jobs that, the employer can get people anytime he wants. And so when you lose someone, if someone gets arrested, even if they're gone 2 or 3 days without telling their employer why, they get fired.
Yeah.
And that's just not right, that we do continue to do that for those people who can't afford bond. And sometimes the bond can be as low as $1,500. And if they can't pay the $150 to a bondsman, they can't get out, and they end up staying.
And just for the record, we ain't trying to put bail bonds out of
No,
bail
no.
bonds agencies out of business. But we
I think maybe they should be. But anyway.
no, go ahead. I'm curious why. Like why?
No, I mean, I think it's predatory. There definitely needs to be reform. I don't know about completely out of business per se, right? Because we do, if the bond is $1,500 and you can't pay that, then obviously paying $150, or if your family can come up with that, is certainly much better. But I don't know. I kind of equate sometimes the fees and stuff and penalties with bail bonds, along with like title companies and all these other things that prey on people of color and low income folks that are just trying to get by. And so I definitely think there needs to be a lot more bail and bond reform, and especially on the quote unquote quality of life offenses and stuff. I don't think that there's number one, I think we should stop arresting, find other paths to that as well. But definitely the quality of life offenses should be, signature bonds and things of that nature.
And for my early intervention court, that's what it's designed for, to take those nonviolent offenses that really they're not a threat to the community, just let them out on what the state calls it a UJR bond now, unsecured judicial relief. It's the new name for an OR bond. Letting those people out on those cases prevents those economic consequences that I talked about before. And hopefully we can model that here in Cobb County, that it spreads throughout the state. But it's going to be important that people have to understand, if we let you out on a UJR bond for the early intervention court, please come back to court.
Yeah.
Because if you don't come back to court, then I have no choice but to give you a bench warrant. And then when you get out of bond, you're not going to get a bond because you failed to come to court in the first place.
Speaking of coming to court, though, I'm curious about the things that maybe your office is doing to embrace technology and stuff. Not just for COVID, but I think COVID showed us that we can do things better. The way we've done court has remained unchanged for so long. It's like you come and you sit all day and you have to take off work or whatever. So I'm wondering, like, how, like, what you're seeing of now, like, kind of essentially being forced, right? Because we can't just sit here and pack a courtroom, and maybe like what things that you're going to take with, forward from that.
Well, I thought all the questions would come from
I'm
Sean.
sorry. I'm sorry.
No, it's definitely open dialogue.
Well, no, that's a great question, because one of the things we have to talk to our judges about, because the judges were famous for, okay, I got a 300 calendar, 300 person calendar. I want you there all day long. And if you're number 300, you're waiting all day long. And so one of the things we have to realize, okay, we can call 10 people in 15 minutes. So you come from 9 to 9:15. You're from 9:15 to 9:30. That's the way we need to try to make it happen. So that way a lawyer's not sitting there all day. You don't have a defendant sitting there all day. And now that we have the technology to do Zoom court or WebEx court, my attorneys can sit at home and do their court appearances. The defense attorney should be able to do the same thing. If the person's in jail, they should be able to do the same thing at the jail. The defendant should be able to do the same thing. And if we put specific times to it, we can really make it much more convenient for everybody. And I think that's one of the ways that we're going to, especially in the season of COVID, we're trying to formulate more ways to have courts safer,
right,
and easier for everybody. And right now, our office has got the technology where every single person in my office has the ability to work from home. They can access their files. They can scan documents. They have a lap. We gave everybody a laptop so they can work from home. So there's no excuse for us not to be able to do that. It's just going to get the judges to buy in on it.
Yeah, and most of them been there forever, and they used to the way that things were. And a lot of people, when you're used to the way things were, you don't want to change. Something we hit on earlier that I wanted to go back to because so we work in Florida too, and we just recently Florida just passed a bill to increase the minimum wage, and it came out yesterday that there's a senator in Florida who wants to increase. Okay with the increase of the minimum wage, but he wants to deny people who were ex-felons or ex-offenders the right of having access to the increase. So they voted for increase, but he wants to take the law and say, once again, like how they did with the Florida voting rights law, where the voters voted on one thing and then the governor decided that, hey, you know what, we're going to do it better and different for you. And he wants to redefine it to where ex-offenders no longer have a right and access to that. And once again, I think it goes back to policy. Like policies we see even in the state of Georgia, like we have a whole bunch of policy things that are coming up in the state of Georgia that we have to be paying attention to. The state house is trying to change the way we elect our Secretary of State, right? Because they're upset about the way the person who was in the office doing the job the right way.
Right.
So I mean, there's a lot of things they're trying to do, but I think that too from the reason why we elect officials like you, the reason why we elect officials like DA Patsy, the reason why we elect officials like Fannie Willis is because of the fact that where our voices go so far, your voices go a little further, right? You can get in the room to people who actually get into the room with the people who make these decisions.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And then we have people like Fallon there.
I knew that was coming.
With a loud mic helping us as well. But I mean, like even on issues like that, what is your opinion about things like for example, I'm pretty sure that you don't agree with the senator from Florida tying the minimum wage, like giving a minimum wage increase, but not allowing felons to be entitled to that. But even if you catch a felony, like you were saying, I think recently on our phone call with the pastors, I mean, that can stop a person from getting scholarships for school. Mm-hmm. That can stop a person from Pell Grant. Yeah. Even now, right now, there's people who have businesses who may be having like an indictment or some issue going on, that now can't even get PPP or EIDL loans because of the fact that they have a pending indictment that could take up to a year to 2 years right now with COVID for them to finish up everything. So,
yeah, a lot of these laws, they affect minority communities disproportionately. And lots of times that's exactly why they're passed.
Right.
I mean, if you go back all the way to the 1860s, when a lot of the laws that we see now for vagrancy, loitering, and prowling were all designed to keep Black people from getting ahead in life and basically turn the prison back into a slave plantation. It still continues today.
Yeah.
And you're talking about restricting minimum wage for people who have felons. Okay, so what do we want them to do? Continue to be felons? Mm-hmm. And that's the wrong answer. We should be giving them every opportunity to succeed so that way they don't have to resort back to crime. And that's why it's so important that our reentry programs, the things that we do as far as record restrictions and things are so critical to each and every person. I had a lawyer call me the other day. He had a client who wasn't offered first offender for a drug charge that he had. That drug charge has kept him from promotions. It's kept him from different housing. And because it was he didn't get the first offender, now we're going to go back and give him retroactive first offender, mm-hmm. which we just recently changed a couple of years to be able to allow that to happen. Mm-hmm. And now with the new law, the Senate Bill 288, I love the law, but it doesn't go far enough.
Right.
Because you can only restrict 2 misdemeanors. It should go as far as being able to restrict nonviolent felonies, even some violent felonies that have 10, 12 years away from then. So it's different things that we have to advocate to show that, okay, we want people to be able to make a living. We want people to be productive citizens, and we cannot continue to hamper them with the way our laws are written right now.
Yeah, and one thing I'm adamant about, one of the things I'm really big about, one of the things that me and Fallon agree on, is that once a person has served their time, they need to be able to have their rights restored. And yes. When I say right restored, I don't mean like the right to carry a gun. I'm talking about the simple right to vote. I don't care if you don't get no other right. Give them that right, because I think that when the system looks at a person, so if I'm a judge and I look at a person and I realize that, hey, if I get them 2 years, then 2 years from now they're gonna have a ballot or a vote to go punch on a ballot. I look at the way I sentence them differently, because of the fact that I know that it's tied in Florida. Prior to their law being adjusted, a judge was able to sentence you to 3 years, give you 2 years probation, knowing they were going to retire in 2, and knowing they didn't have to worry about seeing you on a vote for them in the next election. I think that is a part of what is so important. I know Trinice has some questions.
Yes, I do. So,
and I want to say this too. So he is an aspiring. He wants to be an attorney. So like this is like his dream. this is his dream job, and we announced Fallon. He did.
Yeah, I did.
He did.
But a little further, I also want to become a politician. So this is something that I'm really passionate about. So for your office, DA Brody, I want to know how you guys are handling cases. Is it a little bit different? Are you guys, because a lot of times there are a lot of people convicted of violent crimes who probably have not done the crime or who was falsely convicted. So have you guys, how have you decided to make a policy where you guys or your prosecutors under you look at cases a little bit differently?
Well, in that case, we look at all cases the same. We take all the facts, and if the facts show us that person should be guilty, then we go forward with a plea offer. And if they don't want to take the plea offer because they say they're innocent, then we have to go to trial. We have to look at the facts. So and we can't sit there and look at cases differently. We have to look at them all the same, because that person who's innocent, if we're looking at the facts, right, and the facts don't point to them, then it's our duty to say, okay, these facts don't point to him. You guys need to go do some more investigation, find the real offender. And so in those cases, we should be dismissing the case against that person if the facts don't show it that they're guilty. Okay. And our goal is to make sure that we don't rush to judgment on anything. Yeah. That everything, when we go to court, we don't do anything illegal. We don't hide evidence. We don't try to put in evidence that we know shouldn't be put in. We should be doing everything right the first time, so that way, if we get a conviction, it's a true and fair conviction, that person got justice.
Okay, so I have a question in a specific situation.
Okay.
Without saying too much.
Oh boy.
So I know of this person. Yeah.
That's why I'm like, oh boy.
Maybe no.
Okay. So in terms of like police, who I know a lot of times the police can say, or they can use confidential informants, or they can do whatever, and a lot of times they can still be able to get a warrant without much evidence whatsoever. So a lot of times people can spend a lot of months, and at least now during COVID time, people can spend a long time in jail over, something that does not have that much evidence to get
for the state. I mean, before you guys even get an opportunity to review it,
precisely
per se.
So
it's not. I mean, just to clear it up, it doesn't. The DA's office is not the one that they don't have to take out a warrant on you. An officer can do so alone, right?
Officer can do one alone. I think the question that you're trying to say is what Fallon was alluding to earlier, is that at every level of the criminal justice system, you want to be represented. Yeah. And so if you get charges on a warrant that you didn't do, you get representation, they do a probable cause hearing. And then there's a neutral magistrate court judge that sits there and listens to that evidence and then makes the decision whether there's enough to go forward. And just because it doesn't go forward doesn't mean the investigator's not going to investigate more to find more evidence. But at that particular time, if there's not enough evidence, the magistrate court will release you from jail.
Okay.
Yeah. But typically, there is very few and far in between when you win at that magistrate court level, and because the threshold is so low.
It is so low. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's also too the flip side is that for people who are able to get representation, who are able to get out of jail, they don't even get the opportunity for proper cause hearings. They have to wait until they're indicted or whatever the case may be.
You can still get a probable cause hearing even if you get bonded out. The key thing is getting representation.
Yeah.
And I said this last week. The first time I went into a courtroom, I saw nothing but minorities. Mm-hmm. And the reason was because they weren't taking the time or didn't have the money to get representation to represent them in court. And that is so critical that at each level of the court system, you need to have representation, no matter even a traffic ticket, really.
Absolutely.
So that way you get the best deal possible, and it's critical. And that's one of the things that my early intervention court is designed for. Is when you come in before the judge, we're basically going to say, okay, you're going to come back in 30 days. In that 30 days, you have an opportunity to get an attorney. If you can't afford an attorney, when you come back in 30 days, there's going to be a circuit defender here to qualify you, to see if you qualify for one there. And that way, you're represented throughout every special part of the case. Because when you come into the courtroom and you're by yourself, you're what we call pro se, you are such a disadvantage.
Say the wrong thing, yeah.
It's easy because I could sit there and say, okay, tell me what happened. And almost 99% of the time,
They want to tell a side.
They do, because
They do.
they feel like they can come in and tell you their story
And
and,
don't
that
even know
it's going
that-
to all go
yeah.
away. And
They're incriminating
when I was a
themselves.
They incriminate
prosecutor,
themselves.
right, I was always like, this is an adversarial process. Please do not tell me. I mean, but there's prosecutors that aren't going to do that, right? They're going to sit there and listen to them tell their whole story.
Yeah, and once again, and the one thing that I do appreciate with working with you per se is that you guys are making a lot of adjustments. One of the things that I thought was very interesting on our call we had like 2 weeks ago with the pastors is that you want to actually get out to churches and actually talk to people about whether or not you're guilty or you're not guilty. These are the steps you need to take.
Exactly.
And I think that conversation needs to be had more.
Yes,
because
yes.
definitely from the perspective of and I don't care whether you're white, you're black, because there's some white kids who have been messed up in the system because they don't know, right? But we know that most of the time it affects the minority community. It's just about knowing what your rights are, knowing what the process is so that you don't screw yourself over.
Exactly.
And I think that's important. And we are going to be working with you to make sure we can get those meetings set up. And maybe we get Fallon, the famous Fallon on there too.
I'm retired. I'm a retired attorney.
If you say something like that, Fallon will be the first one at the door.
When I say I know.
No, the one thing I love about her is that she wants people to know.
Yeah.
And she wants the best for people. So, that's why I love her so much, because every time there's an issue, she's front and center, making sure people understand why this is an issue.
You didn't even know she was going to be here today.
No, I didn't know. I did not know.
I couldn't tell you because I didn't want you to change your mind. Make sure we
No,
kept
we've
you-
been on panels and things
We've been on
before
panels.
we
together.
tied in. So another thing too that I didn't notice until today, and I was very ignorant of this fact. When you won, you didn't just win. You won. I mean, you decisively won. And what that told me is that, and I would speak for Cobb County. Cobb County had a sweep. Like for me, I think Cobb County had a sweep. From the sheriff's office to the commissioner board,
Commissioners.
down to the DA's office. They had a sweep because they were tired of the way that the system was working.
Well, I'll tell you why we had a sweep, because we finally figured out, the minority communities finally figured out, we need to get out and vote.
Absolutely.
And how important it was to vote, one, against Trump.
Yeah.
And two, we have to remember this the rest of our lives, that each and every election is critical. Because the stuff that you see trying to happen at the Gold Dome in Georgia right now, if they know we're not going to vote, they don't care how it affects us. But if they know we're going to vote, and we're going to vote in numbers, they're going to start paying attention to what we're saying.
Yeah, and it was funny because in Cobb County, they thought that I guess the special election by them closing some of the early voting places that people would still got to vote. But hey, I just want everybody to know Georgia went blue.
Yep.
And thanks to people like Fallon.
Yes. So my day job is the organizing and elections director for the Working Families Party. So we definitely knocked on 230,000 doors across the state, sent 7 million texts, over like 900,000 phone calls. So
Yeah, we was getting those texts.
I know everybody got, but it worked though. I know everyone was tired of those texts, but it worked,
did
right?
work.
It worked.
It worked.
So I know y'all was tired of it, but hey. So super
work-
excited. So.
Working families and fair fight.
Yeah, the Fair Fight did an
Awesome
awesome job.
Yeah.
They did.
Awesome job.
And New Georgia Project.
I mean,
New
and,
Georgia
and, and I'll give it to you. There's other small organizations that don't get the credit, but they were out there just as much, knocking on doors, spending money. I know our organization put $20,000 into the last election, and we were just really focused on letting people know, because we don't go for one party or the other. We were just letting
Don't you
people
hate
know
that nonpartisan
yeah, that nonpartisan. But we were just letting people know that you have a right to vote and where you can go vote. And we even wanted people to know that many people didn't even know that they were able to register to vote for the special election up until I think it was December 5th or something like that.
Yeah.
The day after my birthday. Yeah. So, I mean, that is just important. But I think that one of the things, too, going back to some of the things that you're doing, I think that's what's really important is to educating the community about what their rights are.
Yes.
And I don't think that that's something that we've done good enough a job at. And even when I was talking to the DA office in like Gwinnett County, we spoke to the police chief in Gwinnett County the other day. The community don't know. Like I was talking to somebody from Sweetwater Missions the other day, and she was saying like she's just starting to get applications in for people who need rent assistance because they didn't even know that Sweetwater Mission was offering it to her. They was thinking that only Star, I think it was Star, the name of the nonprofit, Star something.
I know.
But they were the only nonprofit that was offering it, because the first time around they were the only one, and this time the county commission split it up and gave it to Sweetwater Mission, and they were ready to help people.
Well, I think people need to realize you have to get the newsletters from your commissioners.
Yeah.
You have to get the newsletters from organizations like Working Families and Fair Fight, because they always have that information in there. The Mapleton Community Development, they all have those newsletters. And you can get them online that tell you about all this stuff.
And your state reps too.
And their state reps too. It's critical because for me on Facebook, anytime I see those, I always put them on my page so people can read them and understand that there's help.
Yeah.
But you got to know where to get it.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things that Sheriff Craig Owens said to me, that he said, starting Monday, I have to go start putting people out the houses. And I don't know, he said that's, I don't want to do it, but it's the law. The law requires me to do it. So for those who are out there, I mean, we got to start voting for people who have our interests at hand. Like Fallon said, I really hope the CDC signs another memorandum to expand this whole, because people are hurting out here. And I know for a fact, because when I post the ad, man, it's nothing within 24 hours for me to have over 200 people apply.
Yes.
And these are people who haven't worked since mid 2020,
right?
And these are people who have seen the unemployment benefits messed up, and that's another thing too. We have to also be real too, that most people, I would not say 20 to 30% of people who commit crimes, they usually commit it because they found themselves in a rough spot and they're trying to find themselves out of a rough spot. Yeah. One of the things that I know you have done is reform drug court. You want to talk a little bit about how you guys have reformed the drug court down in Cobb County?
Well, for all simple possession charges, we don't want to charge anybody. We want to do them all pre-adjudication and basically send them to counseling to get counseling for their addiction issues. If they can complete that counseling within 90 to 120 days, we're going to dismiss the charge. If their problem is so serious that they can't do it, then we're going to ask them to go to an accountability court. And the accountability court is a 2 to 3 year program. The key issue about the accountability court that we were talking about before is that they got to want to get better.
Right.
And if they do that, if they want to get better, the drug court is going to help them get a place to stay. It's going to help them get a secure job. It's going to help them every step along the way, so that way when they graduate, they don't have to resort back to going to drugs. Because sometimes I like to say drugs are like trying to live in an alternate universe. And lots of times, if your life is so bad, that's your alternate universe going through your addiction things. And so we're trying to avoid that. And through drug court, you learn your triggers, you learn the things that cause you to go to that world. And so hopefully, if you want to get better, you will, and you'll be able to overcome those things.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think when we talk about drug court, one of the big drugs that I was not a proponent of back in the day, and I've said this to Fallon 100 times before, I was not a proponent of marijuana. I was all for people should not do it. His head lifted up. People should not do it. It's wrong. And I've had 8 surgeries on my stomach between the last 3 years, right? And my last one was in June, where I had my whole colon removed. And I ended up I came out and my problem was nauseousness. I could not break nauseousness. And I eat through my arm and everything right now. So even with that, I'm taking medication through my arm. They know sometimes I take a Zofran through my arm and it does not work. So recently, I've just applied for a medical marijuana card and they gave it to me, and I've tried using it, and it actually works for some of my symptoms. And that's one of the things that too I think that we have to be more expansive of, is how we allow it to be used. From the perspective of marijuana, there's people who are sitting in jail who have I read an article about a lady, I think they were somewhere up Kansas or something like that, who literally, she had some kind of sickness that required her that marijuana helped her for. She ended up getting pulled over because she was probably a little bit too over the limit. Yeah. And I get it. There's probably no way to record the limit when it comes down to marijuana, but still, if we know that it can be used for medical purposes, we know that it's been saving a lot of lives.
Yeah, but driving is still a driving under the influence, which is
still an issue.
Which is still an issue.
But how does that work in Georgia with medical marijuana?
Well, basically, if you get stopped,
you're still illegal.
If you're violating the rules of the road and they pull you over, the first thing they're going to ask you if you've been drinking. And if you haven't been drinking, they're going to ask you if you've been smoking, and then they're going to ask you to stick out your tongue. And when you smoke marijuana, your taste buds raise up on your tongue, so they'll know you've been smoking. And then they're going to put you through the what are they called? The field sobriety test. And if you fail those, they're going to determine that you're over the limit as far as how much marijuana you should have been smoking. And so that's going to get you arrested. And most of the time, they're going to ask you whether you consent to a blood test or a urine test. And then that blood or urine test is going to come back with how much marijuana you have in your system.
Right.
Where you go wrong is when you take those field sobriety tests. If you do bad on those field sobriety tests, you're going to get arrested every time, no matter how much you've smoked or drank or whatever.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, once again, people knowing. Because I think that even people now who may even, because even Georgia hasn't defined what medical marijuana means yet. For example, I know my mom, she had a couple of years ago fell through a stage, and she gets a medical marijuana card down in Florida, but they have dispensaries down there where you can go purchase it. In Georgia, it's not an option. So it's like they give you the card, but then it's like you go figure out where you're going to get your supply from yourself. Right. And it doesn't make sense, because now you're sending somebody to go find a street pharmacist, which we know street pharmacists ain't giving you the stuff that you need. It's not medical. It's not helping you. You know what I'm saying? And then they end up in this bad predicament. But I do think that some of the changes you're making on the drug court is going to be big for people, because once again, an addiction shouldn't keep you locked up forever.
And the thing with marijuana, most people can break that habit pretty easy. So if you come in, and the other thing that we're changing is we're not going to look at your past criminal history, because most of the time, if you had a previous drug charge, you couldn't get into a diversion program. I don't care. My idea is, okay, I'm going to start you anew. Everybody's new. So if you come in, you could have 10 of them. I'm still going to put you in diversion, so you can show me that you can stay away from this stuff. And if you can do that, then we're going to dismiss the case. I think with marijuana, almost everybody should be able to complete diversion, because it really just requires you to stay away from it for probably 90 days, 30 days to get that first clean test, and then 2 more tests, and you're good. So I think that's going to be easy for most people. Now, the other drugs are going to be a little bit harder, because they're more addictive. But the thing about marijuana that I'll say this is, it has a lot of medical uses. And people need to understand is, what you have to try to do is don't smoke in your car.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're going to smoke,
automatic probable, that's automatic probable cause.
Make it a hot box.
make it a hot box.
Yeah.
Even if you're carrying it in your car, put it in the trunk.
Right.
Until you get home, because if you're carrying it in the car, the officer's going to smell it. And if he smells it, he can search your car. And if he finds it, you're going to get arrested. So that's why you don't want to do that. Smoke it at home. When you get home in the evening time, smoke it. Don't go nowhere else. Don't do anything else. Get your munchies. Do all your stuff.
And he's speaking from the perspective if you have a medical marijuana. For everybody else,
no, but
and not giving you permission to go out and break the law per se.
And I also want to note, like, it's I feel like it shouldn't be different than like other, if we're talking about the medical context, other prescription drugs, right? If you take Zoloft or whatever, you shouldn't then go drive, right? It's the whole point, because you're now a danger to, whether we believe that marijuana should be legal or not, like that's beside the point. At this point right now, it's not. And then you're putting yourself in a position where you're going to get arrested, and marijuana DUIs are hard. It's hard to get out of a marijuana DUI.
Very hard.
And I would say this too. I mean, people got to understand too that we are so much depending on President Biden to pass a federal legislation to legalize marijuana, but he could pass it on the federal level, and the states still hold you accountable for it because the state hasn't passed it. I know there are states like Illinois that has just recently passed recreational marijuana. We know Washington and California, the big states.
But a lot of that is all about money.
Yeah.
And what you're going to see is, for our street level pharmacists, once they do pass the marijuana legalization law, they're going to be out of business.
They are.
And so they need to understand that, okay, let's go to Colorado and find out how we get into the business. So when it does come here, people who are prepared are going to be the ones who start making the money.
Yeah.
And our street pharmacists, whether they know it or not,
they won't be. They won't be prepared.
And there's other policy considerations. Like a lot of these other places, they bar people that have any criminal drug convictions from actually actively participating in the legal market for marijuana. So again, why I'm the policy person, right? Like there's all these considerations. So we always need to look at the fine print and make sure that we advocate for. You can't be like, okay, this person spent 20 years doing it and it was illegal, and so they have some charges, but now you don't give them the opportunity or path to do it in a legal way.
Right. Yeah, that is, I've never thought about that. See, once again, that's good to have Fallon McClure.
I'm trying not to roll my eyes at you.
Because she bring, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to have the conversation, because I know that like you have to look at it from a different perspective now, and I know that you've done some time as a solicitor as well, so you have that defense. I mean, that prosecuting aspect of it, and Fallon brings both sides to it because you was a Douglas solicitor, right? Yeah.
Well, one thing it's key for all prosecutors though is you have to look at both sides.
Yeah.
Because you have a duty to both sides. You're not there just to get convictions. You're there for justice. So you have to have a duty to both sides. So if someone comes in with a marijuana charge and you see it was a bogus search, you have a duty to dismiss the case because the search was not good. And most prosecutors don't realize that. And that's why it's so important to have an attorney. Because a prosecutor, if he doesn't want to, he doesn't have to look at both sides. When I was a prosecutor, as a solicitor, I always looked at both sides. Even with tickets, just regular traffic tickets, I always looked at both sides. What happened?
Oh, but you were hard on me on that case we had together, though. You know which one I'm talking about.
I don't recall that.
No, I actually know it. I can't even knock it. 'Cause I had a solicitor who just dismissed a speeding ticket for me like early this year, and it sat out for like a year, and they dismissed it because the officer wrote the ticket in somebody else's name, and I was honest enough to call the officer. Like I called the police department like 1 o'clock in the morning. It's like, hey, you wrote in the wrong name. Can you reach out to the police officer? They reached out to me. He's like, oh, meet me at the Walmart over here wherever it's at over in my area. So I'm like, okay, well, he's fun. Just rip this ticket up. And he had my new ticket ready inside. So we went to court. The solicitor, he was like, he looked at it and he was like, and he understood the reason why I was rushing because of my job and there was a break-in at one of our stores. And he was like, well, let's just make everybody's life easier and get rid of it. I was like, okay, this is what I'm talking about. And there was a judge's secretary. She was like right there the whole time. She's like, okay, I'm going to get him to sign this right now. And she told me not to go nowhere. Within 5 minutes, it was signed, filed, everything. I was like, that's the solicitor's office I want. So I'm glad I didn't run up against you if I'm hearing that.
No, it wasn't.
Still had me sitting there for that ticket.
It really wasn't him. It was my client, to be honest. Like he gave him multiple chances, and my client just wouldn't do what he was supposed to do. But me advocating for the best interest of my client kept trying to get some more opportunity.
But you know what? But you said something that's really important. It's the prosecutor's job to look at it from both angles.
Yes.
And the problem is, like, you're the DA, yeah, but you can't change the heart of how many people who work for you?
I have over 40 lawyers.
Over 40 lawyers. Like, you can't change their heart. You're not going to be in every courtroom where they're at watching them. So it's like.
My goal is to try to impart my vision to them.
Right.
And also impart that vision to the defense bar. Because the defense bar can say, hey, this is what DA Brody has been saying. Now, I need you to comply with that vision. And then, the supervisors, they'll go to the supervisor and say, hey, this is what we're trying to do. And if it's within that vision that I have and it's reasonable, there should be no reason why we don't do that. And we had a meeting with our defense bar 2 Wednesdays ago. And I gave that message to him. I said, look, if you've got a case, tell us what it's going to take to take care of it. And if it's something reasonable, hey, we'll go with it. If it's not reasonable, then we'll ask for something more. But we're trying to, especially for our nonviolent offenders, we're trying to close out all these cases as fast as possible so we can focus on the serious stuff. The special victims unit cases, the murder cases, those type cases.
Absolutely. Trinice?
Okay. So there is, speaking of marijuana, it was interesting because I know that there was the DA of Baltimore, and I know there was another DA in Texas who took the same approach. The DA in Texas, I think, is taking the exact same approach that you're taking, which I found that really interesting and really commendable. And then a lot of drug charges and a lot of, like how you mentioned that, if it goes federal, and a lot of states want to adapt it. It's a lot of, with the mandatory minimum sentencing and a lot of stuff, it's disproportionately targeted at Black communities or minority communities. So it's commendable that you're trying to make the changes.
There was no question there.
Okay.
Throwing him a compliment. Just throwing him a compliment. Just throwing him a compliment.
But no, he's right, though, because one of the things we haven't seen in a long time is where prosecutors are saying, okay, we know these things have been disproportionate to the minority communities. How can we work around those things without saying, we're trying to do this for us and not them?
Right.
And I keep telling people all the time, we're not trying to do this for us and not them. We're just trying to make it equal across the board. And that's what's important.
Yeah.
And I think that, I mean, once again, I think that's the most important part. And I think that's why people voted in such large numbers, is because they knew that that change needs to be there. Like justice is justice, but it has to be equal.
Yes.
And I think that's just important. And I think, you know, I'm going to hate at you a little bit. Fallon always reminds me, man, I'm terrible with time. So this is the most time we spent together in like, what, a couple of months I've seen you. We hung out because she always so busy.
Anyway, but also I think the other way too that we make stuff even out too is like we again look at these other laws and stuff coming through the legislature, like when under Kemp this, you know, gang enhancements where they made it essentially prosecutors can just say you're in a gang, right? Not even any real proof. And now we're adding, you know, 10 plus years and a lot more charges because now the conspiracies and all the other stuff when, you know, and I think there's like a case out there like in Augusta or Athens right now where there's a drive-by and I don't even think they have the right person. And this guy has been in jail for like at least 9 months and he has like 30 something charges because the victim said that he might have been in a gang, but it's not even the right person, right? And so, so like repealing those things, repealing citizens arrest, making stand your ground actually be applicable to all people, right?
Yes.
So like, you know, again, there's a case in Statesboro with the young black kid where they were literally chasing him and his girlfriend down and he shot and is trying to use stand your ground, but he's still in jail to this day. And so the other way that we help make it equitable is, yes, electing, you know, prosecutors and stuff that are, you know, making their offices and their charging decisions and all of that. But also we have to make sure that who we're electing to the state house. And we also have to look at the fine print. Like, you know, they passed the hate crimes bill last year, but it's crap. It really, like, if you look at it, it was just something in that moment to try to pacify people, but it doesn't actually do anything that people think that it does. So
How do you feel about the hate crime bill?
I think it was just a expedient type thing that they did for political reasons.
Yeah.
Everybody was like, Georgia doesn't have a hate crimes bill, so let's go out and pass one real quick. And it doesn't have any teeth to it. And that's a problem. And like Fallon was saying, and this disturbed me yesterday, I actually took a webinar about RICO. And one of the things with RICO, it's designed here in Georgia to get gang members. And so if you committed two crimes and you're part of a gang, instead of you just being charged with the 2 crimes, now we can put this RICO charge on you, which is a racketeering charge. And basically what happens now, instead of you getting 5 years, now you can get 15. And the thing about the gang issue is, I think this actually happened in Cobb too. There was a party. It was a wear red party. So somebody calls the police come out. Now everybody's got red on, so now they're all in a gang.
Oh, wow.
Because they all got the same color on. And to me, that is just the most stupidest thing you could think of. My wife would kill me for saying stupid, but it is. And we have to get away from that. We put so much emphasis on gang violence that we're overlooking the real gangsters.
Right.
We're overlooking the fact that some of these 14 and 15-year-old kids have been induced into doing this by saying, hey, if you don't join the gang, we're going to beat you up, we're going to kill you, we're going to do this. You know, we need to make a better effort to say, okay, how do we keep these kids away from the gangs? How do we put the gangs out of business? By stopping their streams of income, you know, drugs. Get people off addictions. Focus on these kids before the gangs reach them, so we can do those things to put gangs out of business. That's what we're going to try to do here in Cobb going forward. So we make sure that, you know, we minimize. There's always going to be gangs, but we minimize what they do. You know, we've got to we need more legislations on hotels, especially those along the interstate, as far as, you know, when you check somebody in, the IDs, the identification, all that stuff, because that's where all this human trafficking stuff happens.
Right.
And you know, we are one of the biggest hubs for that here in Cobb County, down in the Six Flags area. So there's a lot of things that we need to focus on that we got to get rid of.
You just changed my whole perspective of going over by Six Flags. I didn't even know that. I didn't even know that. And I stay in Mapleton. But, you know, and I think that it ties into what both of you guys are saying, because it takes policy,
Yes.
which means that we have to get out there and we have to elect people and from the state level who represent our interests. But also at the same time, once we elect other officials, we have to make sure that you guys are doing what you need to do on your level to make sure that it's fair across the board. And one of the things that's interesting to me too is that about even suffocating gangs and Lord, I stay in Cobb somewhere. even when it comes down to suffocating gangs on a honest note, I think that too part of it in the breakdown is that when we have 14 or 15-year-olds that don't trust the law enforcement who's there to protect, I think that is another bridge that has to be kind of rebuilt. And that's something that we've been working on with Cobb Police and like the sheriff's office on what can we do. Because like I was telling them, I tell the story to everybody. I had my 2-year-old little niece in the car the other day, or not the other day, like a month ago. And Cobb sheriff's office or Cobb police officer pulled up next to us and she freaked out. And for me, I was like, okay, we got to get everybody on the phone from Cobb. I want to talk to everybody because that's not okay. That feeling for a 2-year-old black girl is not okay. And that's even more, and you can speak to this because you have a black son. I mean, you're an attorney. Even that doesn't protect your black son when he goes out there on the streets every day.
I mean, it doesn't protect me. Like when I get pulled over, I still be like, and I know my rights, right?
You don't tell them that you're fouling. And
no,
they don't just let you go. Like everybody be like, forget it.
No, I don't pull those cards.
I actually said that last week. I'm the district attorney, and when a police car gets behind me, I get scared.
Yeah,
because I don't know what's going to happen, and
they may not much recognize you yet.
Probably. Well, I think they will now.
Yeah,
but one of the things I'll say about gangs is we have to, as a community, we have to understand why kids join gangs, and most of the time it's because they don't have a sense of family.
Right.
And gangs provide that sense of family for them. And I hate it for single mothers because lots of times if they're working and the dad is not helping out at all, it makes it hard for them to provide that sense of family at a full-time basis. And now that kid starts looking for somewhere else to go. And and it's bad enough that at 13, 14, 15, kids want to rebel anyway. And without that full-time parent or that full-time mentor, the gangs can easily influence them. And so it's, as a community as a whole, it's something that we have to look at to solve.
Yeah, I mean, and just from a Bible standpoint, the Bible says it takes a village to raise a child.
It takes a village. Yeah.
And we got to get back to the point where we're not afraid of the village, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're not afraid of the village. What you had, Trinice?
Yeah.
Chill 2 fingers up.
So, yeah, you noticed that. Yeah. So, I want to actually start with you. I want to ask both of you guys this question. Immunity, police immunity, or immunity for, like, officials or what have you. But specifically for police, when they do crimes, how, especially, like, when they're arresting somebody and brutalities in the spill, how far do you think immunity should go for police officers?
So that's I don't know. It's complicated in the sense of once they're arrested for actual like crimes and stuff, like if it's not necessarily something acting under the color of law or under their duties, I mean, they don't have immunity anyway, right? Yeah. So there's not just this like automatic sort of immunity. But what happens is, in my opinion, is like why we see a lot of them either not get charged or not. It's because of the way the cases are presented to the grand jury. Gotcha. They're either presented in a way to not get them indicted, or and then, grand juries are secretive proceedings anyway. And so that's, again, back to policies. And if they're secretive, we're not knowing what they're presenting. And so, like, to me, that's Breonna Taylor comes to mind. And because, the grand jury actually was like, oh, we want to come out and tell y'all what he was telling us, right? Because he presented it in a way to make sure that there's and so, but so to your question of actual immunity, I mean, no, they shouldn't have immunity. I mean, but I guess they don't. Now, elected officials have sovereign immunity to an extent if they're like the Secretary of State has immunity in his personal capacity for acts that he was doing as Secretary of State. So
or the president has immunity
or
everything.
Right. So I wasn't gonna go there, right?
He said he could shoot somebody on New York.
So it's a bit of a complicated.
Walk away.
There's some nuances in there.
So I guess redefine my question because I think I kind of left it very broad. So specifically, I know of a case from one of my law classes where a police officer was subduing a guy he was very violent, but he broke his ribs. Obviously you don't have to break his ribs to subdue him, and he broke his arm. So how far should that go to be able to handle like a citizen arrest or what have you?
I don't think citizens arrest should happen in any instance in the sense of like, I think they're bad. Yeah. whether it's, you know, a citizen trying to arrest a police officer or a citizen trying to arrest another citizen. I just don't think that should be a thing. But no, you should get charged for, I mean, I think probably need a few more facts in that situation to have but generally, like if you're beating up, you don't have to beat up someone to take them into custody, and you should be charged for that.
Okay, I brought that up because I remember, in this particular class, I looked up and it was required a lot of different cases where this has happened, and how it works is when my professor was on a case, and probably shouldn't say this, when he was working a case, or cases that he worked beforehand, let's say that, he would tell us about the case that he worked at beforehand, and he would present us a lot of different things, and like cases that he lost, he would ask us, you know, why, and we would have to figure it out, like, you know, in a lot of the cases, it was because police officers, when they were trying to convict the police officers for that, it was that they were in their right, and the term that kept coming up was immunity. So
I'll make this comment on that. This is particularly for you, since you're in law school. You got to remember, every single situation, you need to look at it from both sides, whether you're defending or whether you're prosecuting. So that way, when you look at it from both sides, you can figure out the argument the other side is going to try to make for their case. And that way you can learn to defend your side. So that's critical. Now, when it comes to sovereign qualified immunity for officers, you have to, each case is a case-by-case basis, because the officer can use as much force as it needs to subdue or to gain control of that person. And then sometimes if you have a person who might be on PCP, acting a fool, going crazy, they continue to fight, it may seem like the officer is beating them up or whatever. But once the officer has control, then all that should stop.
Yeah.
And so when you see an officer get somebody on the ground and they've got control and they start beating on them, they're outside of qualified immunity. Now they're gone rogue. And this is one of the things I told when I first got elected. I went around to all the police precincts and everything, and I told them, I said, look, I want your SOPs so you can tell me how your use of force works. You know, what defines how much force you can use. And so they all sent that to me. And I told them, as long as an officer stays within the guidelines, you're good. But once he goes outside those guidelines, then we have an issue. And that's critical that officers know that, because you can't be in a situation where, you know, the biggest example is chokeholds. Because sometimes the only way you can get control of somebody is to start the chokehold. But once you've got control, you can release it. You can still hold somebody without choking them to death.
Right.
And that's what officers have to understand. But for most of us, if you get into a fight, you're going to try to get the other person in a chokehold. I mean, it's just a natural thing that people try to do. But doing that, you don't have to choke somebody out. And I actually had this happen when we came back from Iraq. We had this new soldier that was drunk. We had to go get him. We brought him back to the barracks, and he took a swing at me. And so I put him in a chokehold, and I was holding him, had him under control. And he says, I can still breathe. I said, yeah, that's because I'm not trying to kill you. But officers need to understand that. They can't let their emotions take over, because when your emotions take over, then stuff happens. Because then you lose control, and that's when you see somebody beating somebody holding too long in a chokehold and things like that. And that's why a lot of places have banned the chokeholds, because they know that's the easiest way to kill somebody when you've lost control of yourself.
Yeah, and I think the feeling is just from the perspective of what we've been seeing. But one of the things I've expressed is that we have to be realistic and look at both sides of it, right? But I think it comes from trusting our elected officials, trusting our DA's office to be transparent with us about what's going on. And we know Breonna Taylor's case. We're not even going to talk about that. There was not enough transparency there.
No, there wasn't.
But we wanted to thank you guys for coming out today, because we're going to show that ad for the last part of this. No, we're not? Oh, well, we're still good. We're still going to come off. But we wanted to just thank everybody. Thank D.A. Brody again for coming out. Thank Fallon for coming out today, and, you know, whatever. Thanks, Shanice, for also being here today. And we just want to thank you guys for your time, and we want to continue the conversation. So we want to continue. We'll be back next week. We'll be talking to someone totally different. We'll be talking about Black businesses next week and talking about how you can help your Black business during this COVID time and resources that are out there for you. So join us next week, and we'll be back here next week at 3. Very good.